Noon or evening. I'm not really sure where we are in COP time right now, but very grateful to all of you for taking the time out of all of the chaos and uncertainty surrounding COP28 to be here with us. My name is Rachel Rose Jackson from Corporate Accountability, and I'm joined by many esteemed colleagues and community leaders with a combined decades of experience and wisdom to share with all of you today. I'll introduce our speakers in a minute. And because we are all rather brain fried and maybe a little bit tired at this point in the game, we're going to try to keep each other awake and excited and curious, have some interactive conversation with each other, share our collective experiences, and pose some questions to think about together as well today. So stay tuned for all of that. But first, if you've been here for more than a day or two, it's probably been impossible not to hear the phrase net zero or net zero by 2050 or carbon markets, offsets, geoengineering. This framing of the net zero political agenda and all of the schemes that it unites are part of a much broader strategy by the political elite, the world's largest polluters and polluting corporations to delay, deceive, and distract from the real action we need right now to get to real zero emissions on the timeline we urgently need, and also in a just and caring way. So the net zero claims that we're hearing about in these halls and that the red carpet is being rolled out for are actually nothing like what they look like, or nothing like what they sound like upon closer inspection. Usually these plans are riddled with faulty arithmetic, with unproven schemes, and they provide far too little action way too late in the game. So these false solutions and dangerous distractions that are united under this big net are causing tremendous harm to communities and people around the world, and equally importantly, aren't reducing emissions. And that's why we're here at COP28 for the 28th time, coming together with world leaders, talking about how we actually meaningfully and urgently deliver the action we need to reduce emissions and address the climate crisis. For the next hour or so, though, while it can feel very oppressive and daunting and overwhelming to talk about all of the things that are happening here that are so far from the action we urgently need, we're also going to give ourselves the space and the permission to dream and discuss with our speakers and with you what it would look like to free ourselves from that net, to free ourselves from those dangerous distractions that are condemning communities and ecosystems around the world. But not only that, also to free ourselves from the polluting and oppressive governments and systems and polluters that are denying people and the planet life and culture and beauty, and also taking away our sovereignty. We'll hear about the impacts of false solutions on the ground with some very scary but necessary case studies from our speakers. But equally importantly, we'll also discuss together with you the ways that we can take real action to implement real solutions to get to real zero emissions and what that might actually look like. I'd also like to give a shout out back here to our dear friend who is scribbling away as we're speaking, trying to capture an illustration of the world that we have or the path that we're headed down, and the world as it could, should, and must be. So together we'll also hopefully have that creative envisioning of the road that we want to be headed down to take away with us today and inspire us as we head out on the long journey towards justice. I'd like to introduce our speakers who are joining us today. To my left, we have Tatiana Oliveira from Brazil and the Institute for Socioeconomic Studies, Hemanta Vatanga from Sri Lanka and the Center for Environmental Justice, Suparna Lahiri from the Global Forest Coalition, and Nora Buya from Friends of the Earth Liberia, SDI. We're going to begin by hearing 3 case studies, one from Brazil, one from Sri Lanka, and one from Liberia, about just how damaging and just how dangerous the schemes united by this broader net zero agenda truly are for people and communities. So first, I'm going to hand over to you, Tatiana, to give us a story, an example of how this is playing out in real life, in real time in Brazil.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to Merge. It's always a pleasure to be with you. So I'm Tatiana Oliveira from the Institute of Socioeconomic Studies, also an activist at the Grupo Carta de Belém, which is a network of other organizations in Brazil. I'm going to talk about carbon markets because during negotiations we saw the Brazilian delegation working with ABU and advocating no significant opposition on the very worrying removals language and list of activities provided by Article 6.2. Besides, it is clear that our diplomacy have been throughout the days lobbying to include land-based removals on paper. Maybe this observation can also explain why there wasn't again great opposition by the Brazilian delegates on the language of nature-based solutions on the market approaches under 6.8. So to understand this scenario, it helps to bring the image of what is currently going on in Brazil in relation to carbon markets. Two brief examples. One, voluntary carbon markets. In Brazil, a law firm performed a check on Verra's database to identify voluntary carbon market projects operating in the country. They analyzed 69 of those projects located in the Brazilian Amazon and observed a strong presence in Brazil for agricultural, forestry, and other land use sectors. Some insights are that 11 of those projects have total overlap in areas of collective use. 22 have partial overlap in public areas, and 23 of those 69 projects are actually developed in private areas. But among those 11 projects overlapping in areas of common and collective use, there are 4 that grasped the media's attention in Brazil for all the irregularities they have presented. Those located in an area of extractivist communities included harassment of communities. Some of the projects enlisted more than 1,000 families linked to those projects, which could not be confirmed by following up investigations. Misrepresentation, the companies arrived at the territory claiming they were nonprofits only wanting to help those communities, but at the end they were enlisted in the public registry as profit organizations. Those companies also were profiting from the gift, relationships in the territory, and the relations of trust they build with one another. Communities claim one of the owners of those companies promised land titles to communities, but in fact registered the perimeter of the land in the Brazilian land tenure system and did it in the name of his own company, which he is the only owner, not the community. So this is digital land grabbing. It has a name. And as I said before, it overlaps with public lands. Some of the supposedly those projects were being developed in private property, but then quick check on the system of land tenure in Brazil revealed that those supposedly private properties did overlap with public-owned properties. So what happens before even Verra's audition claimed that this was happening in those projects is that those farmers presented to Verra and to the audition company some documents claiming they were actually the owner of the land, and things flew as nothing had actually never happened. This is a very extreme case, and the public ministry of the state of Pará, where all of these happened, did cancel those titles as fraud. So the land tenure titles of linked to those projects. So this is something that is still going on in Brazil, but I wouldn't like to not mention that we are also discussing in Congress an ETS system which has its own problems. For instance, no participation whatsoever in the discussions, failures on protecting land rights of IPLCs, and a bunch of other very worrying issues. So our position as INASC is that carbon markets are false solutions, that they violate human rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, and that in Brazil, especially in this moment of rebuilding a democracy and bringing back a centrist left-wing government, is that carbon markets are being confused with climate finance, other than really reinforcing and strengthening public policy and public investments to protect the land rights and the human rights of IPLCs. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana, for sharing those examples with us. I actually always personally find these very helpful because I don't know if any of you have been in an Article 6 negotiating room, but it is like speaking another language. It's so technical, it's so complicated. I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding, so I know that you've been there. And that's actually kind of by design, because if we skew things and we don't call them what we really are, and if we don't address what the true impacts are or what the reality of the situation is, it dehumanizes and complicates in a way that allows us to distance ourselves from the very real impacts of what's literally being negotiated here. Although it's always very frustrating and angering to hear examples like this, I think it's actually really important to be talking about it in these spaces, because there are real lives, real ecosystems, real futures, and real presents that are at stake by the technocratic language that's being negotiated here in Article 6, and by the carbon markets, which you so clearly illustrated are really only a way to perpetuate the system that enables the political elite to continue to extract, colonize, and benefit off of the backs of those on the front lines of the climate crisis. I also really appreciate that you brought up the point about carbon markets being used as finance, because this is ridiculous. Like, for as long as UNFCCC has existed, it has been clear that global north countries who are most responsible for climate change have a responsibility to pay their climate debt. But for as long as UNFCCC has existed, they've refused to pay up, they've refused to do their fair share, and then now, in addition to that, they're instead placing these carbon markets as these crumbs of finance, and the implication being that global south communities are just supposed to be grateful that they're receiving some sort of compensation for an action that is condemning them, robbing them of their land, their traditions, their livelihoods, their rights, and also condemning people and the planet. So that particular battle of climate finance now becoming carbon markets and erasing the global north's need to do its fair share of climate action, including paying its climate finance debt, is really relevant, I think, to what we've all seen happening here, and maybe for some of you as well. With that said, if you're starting to feel tired or a little droopy, stand up and do some jumping jacks, but also please feel free to wander over here if and as you would like to. Cesar from the Artivist Network is very amazingly illustrating what we're talking about as we're doing it. Feel free to take a peek, get some inspiration. And while we're doing that, Hamantha, I'm going to hand over to you to give us another real life example of what the impact of some of these things being talked about here at COP looks like in Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much. Probably you have heard about Sri Lanka as a beautiful tourist destination. And a few years back, Sri Lanka was in the media as a 30-year-old war. But this time, our president was here with 80 delegation coming from various countries. Many of them are coming from the business sector and supported by various non-governmental organizations, international level big ones, and also few funders. So last year, our government declared Sri Lanka is bankrupted, because until 2018 we were doing very well, and we were raised into the upper middle income level, but suddenly because of the corruption, because of various other borrowings, especially 47% borrowing has come from BlackRock and other vulture funds, and suddenly we were declared as a bankrupted country. Now this is about 52.6 billion debt crisis. So we are going through a lot of hardships, and there were no fuel and there was no electricity and all these hardships we had. But then the new, we had people's power and then ousted the previous president, and then the new president came and he was more interested on getting money through the climate financing. In fact, he advised former UNEP Executive Director Eric Solheim as the climate consultant, advisor, and also a few others as the advisors, and they came up with something called a climate prosperity plan, which they announced during COP27. This climate prosperity plan is supposed to raise $6.5 billion annually until 2030. That means the total plan is actually $26 billion. And I asked myself, when the whole world was failed to raise even 15 billion, the Green Climate Fund got about 11.9 billion or something. Where is this 26 billion they are going to raise? So these all are going to be the various kind of climate financing. Then they came up with this net zero 2050, which has different kind of net zero 2050. Of course, we are also fighting for the real zero, but their plan is actually about nuclear power, about carbon trading, offsetting, and all sort of things are there. Now, on the outset of this thing, last August, the government of Sri Lanka signed an agreement, memorandum of understanding with the Singapore government under Article 6.2 about this carbon offsetting projects, and this agreement is supposed to be the establishment of the foundation for creating this bilateral framework to deal with the climate finance. So we don't have much details at the moment about this financing mechanism, but we see there are many other supporting groups, like the international groups are already in Sri Lanka giving a lot of support for pushing for this kind of carbon offsetting schemes. I see that not only the government, but even the civil society in Sri Lanka signing these agreements with international organization. But this particular memorandum of understanding signed with Singapore is going to be something bigger, and we don't have much details about how this is going to impact, but it is said that they have signed it under the Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. The second one is actually probably it's much worse, because when the debt crisis happens, the UNDP, United Nations Development Program, and many others who want to do the restructuring of this debt in Sri Lanka, they push for a sort of a, what you call the debt for nature swap. So this is something came a long time ago in 1999 under the United States Tropical Forestry Conservation Act, which they said the money they have given to various countries since 1961, no need to pay back, but you put that money into a separate account, which US government has the veto power if it is more than 5 million, but they have to open up our forest areas for pharmaceutical companies to do their research work, etc. So we opposed in 1999, 2000, and 2001 government decided not to go through this one. But now we see this similar one is coming to Sri Lanka again because of the debt crisis in Sri Lanka. Now this time, one of the international environmental NGO is offering, initially it was like 960 million US dollar debt buyback. But now they say it's more than 1 billion, but the government of Sri Lanka, the treasury of the Sri Lankan treasury announced that they are ready for 7.1 billion US dollar debt available for this debt for nature swap. So this is also worrying to us because the kind of agreements comes, there are people are writing something good about where this Galapagos debt for nature swap as a positive story, but we have big problems because we were told that, so this is about blue credits, which is actually the oceans are going to be kept for probably untouched for some years in order to give a surety under this mechanism. So if that is the case, we are very worrying about the rights of the fishermen, rights of the coastal communities. Because if these kind of climate finance are going to use, although this is not a sort of a climate finance alone, but this is also coming here as a debt for climate swap as a solution. But at the end, if our local communities are going to be affected and if they are not going to be do the fishing in these areas, definitely, so there will be a much bigger impact. So these are very worrying two developments at the moment, other than there are few other developments happening. Now, my biggest worry is now this is not only these organizations are coming, but also the UNDP, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, they all pushing for this kind of arrangement. So we are not sure whether this is going to be under 6.4, but definitely whatever the mechanism, so they are going to bring, we feel like they're going to have impact. So we're going to be studying this situation and see how we can protect the local community rights, because people in our countries, as an island country, so our fishermen are already affected by various climate catastrophes, the sea level rise and acidification, losing all the fishing grounds. And on top of that, if they're supposed to not to do the fishing in certain areas, then there will be a much bigger issue. So these are developing stories, but I think so we should be very worrying. Sri Lanka may not be the only country to see these kind of arrangements. So I think especially the countries in the south need to be worried about what is happening under this debt for nature swap, as well as this whole sort of carbon offsetting programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mantha. Okay, so I didn't know that that's what debt for nature swaps are, which is very confusing and very hard to understand. Now very worrying as you pick it apart and begin to peel the layers back off of it more. I think your story really helps drive home, the interlinkages between this desperation that Sri Lanka was effectively forced into was not one of coincidence, right? It was a carefully orchestrated circumstance of desperation that was spun by the existing colonial and extractivist systems, specifically to create the circumstances to then give the Sri Lankan government effectively no choice except to accept these dangerous distractions. And the examples you gave us, the impacts on the ground are so literal and clear and visceral, but also it really connects back to what's happening here and helps us connect the dots, between the two. It's really easy, I think, especially for those of us who follow policy, we can get so stuck in like our zone, so what's happening in climate finance, what's happening in Article 6, what's happening on the global goal of adaptation or the global stock take. But all of these things are so interconnected, because if the delivery of climate finance continues to be denied, continues to be refused, and continues to be held hostage, then schemes like this begin to proliferate. And that's all part of the plan. It's not by coincidence. Yeah. And these are the same schemes that continue to rob people of their sovereignty, and not just people, but the very same people on the front lines of the climate crisis who have this centuries of knowledge of how to steward and look after the earth, who have these real community-controlled solutions at the ready, and where we hold the greatest potential for the strongest, most equitable response to the climate crisis. But the more that we perpetuate these schemes, these step for nature swaps, the more that we rob these very people on the front lines of their sovereignty, the more that we condemn not only them, but others around the world, and the farther we get from this real zero vision and real solutions that we all know we so urgently need. So I appreciate you taking the time to really lay that bare for us. We're going to have, I think, one more example to share with all of you on sort of the negative impacts of these dangerous distractions and this net zero agenda. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit more about the flip side, the world we want and need, and how we get there. But first, Nora, I'm going to hand over to you to share some of your experiences with us. I think you're going to talk a bit about this blue carbon that we're all hearing about. I'm confused, whether it's pink, red, yellow, orange, tie-dye, what hydrogen is, what these deals are, what this blue carbon is, and what we need to be worrying about or doing about it. So please help us understand.
Thank you. So again, I'm Nora Buya. I'm from Liberia, and I work for Sustainable Development Institute, a small NGO that is helping to champion the rights of local communities impacted by extraction activities, including mining, logging. So I will share some thing that is happening in Liberia, particularly regarding carbon, the introduction of carbon markets. So for a little background, Liberia holds 43% of the Upper Guinea forest, which is a stretch of forest between our country and the sub-region in West Africa. So we hold the largest share, and according to our National Forest Inventory in 2019-2020, this represents at least 6.7 million hectares of forest. There is no doubt our forest is threatened by a rapid and alarming rate of deforestation. So in 2022, according to Global Forest Watch, we recorded the highest primary forest loss since 2001. So with this background, there is this new phenomenon coming in called carbon markets, or carbon offset, or carbon trading, which I guess many of you are aware about. So in March of this year, our government executed an MOU and a proposed agreement with a company in UAE called Blue Carbon. The idea is to develop carbon trading opportunities. So Blue Carbon has been giving, or will be, the government intends to give Blue Carbon about 1 million hectares of Liberia forest land. Yeah, it sounds amazing, right? Including land privately owned, land protected, proposed protected areas, and land owned by communities. The deal is supposed to span over a period of 30 years and can be renewed for another 30 years. The Liberia government suggests that this deal will offer an opportunity to reverse the alarming trend of deforestation. It will contribute to global efforts to fight climate change. It also sees this opportunity to generate revenue for development. And generally, yes, so Liberia is one of the poorest countries on the planet. So the government expression for development is somehow reasonable. However, the provisions of this deal is inherently troublesome and illegal. I'm going to narrate some of the concerns that civil society, communities, and the media around the world within Liberia has already raised. So, civil society and communities in Liberia have been cautioning the government that this deal is going to violate rights of communities, threaten livelihoods and well-being of up to 1 million people. More than half of Liberia's population of about 5 million live in rural areas where most land designated for this deal will be granted. This deal is also going to disenfranchise community land ownership in selected areas, and it will violate legal rights to free, prior, and informed consent. Liberia Land Rights Law of 2018, which was passed just 5 years ago, is clear that communities own their customary forest land and resources. Claiming legal rights to market the forest carbon has clear implications for this. The Liberia government will be acting inconsistent with the Land Rights Act if it were to consider that it has the legal right to market forest carbon for forest land it does not own. Additionally, communities will be prevented from establishing sources of income while in the process of establishing preparing the area for these carbon operations. They will have no rights to access their income generating opportunities or to carry on income generating activities. They also do not have direct autonomy over how any benefits payable to them will be managed or used. Benefits received are going to be controlled by a committee constituted by Blue Carbon and the government. There are also issues of transparency. The contract has been considered to be confidential, is extremely vague. It has not been open yet for wide consultation. So it's happening just with few selected government officials and Blue Carbon. The contract is also being single source. This is against Liberia law. A contract of this nature has to pass through the public procurement procedures, but this has not happened. There are issues of understanding what this contract brings. There is little prediction about the profits and the value of carbon credits. It is unclear how much Blue Carbon will invest, as well as what it plans to harvest and how many credits it expects and what it costs. And this is not new. The whole thing about carbon credit began somewhere around 2009 when Liberia government nearly signed a contract with a UK-based company, Harvesting Corporation, for over 400,000 hectares of forest. The agreement was later found to be in violation of Liberia laws, and many high-level government officials were charged with bribery and corruption. So this is not new. This is our second attempt to go into this carbon, and we're seeing this trend of government attempt to hijack customary communities' land, violates the legal framework related to this kind of project. And what we have also said as civil society, we said a beneficial agreement to Liberia should not contain carbon offsetting conditionality. Liberia forest is an asset and a product for global benefit, which should attract funding on its own for the benefit it will bring to the global community in contributing to mitigating effects of global carbon emission. We need to make a case for it to be conserved rather than enter into these kinds of carbon schemes. The government of what is clear is that Liberia and its forest communities need to be compensated for protecting and restoring their forest. Liberia, as I said earlier, is the only forest-rich country left in West Africa, and is one of the poorest countries in the planet, in the world. Our government needs to reconsider any action geared towards an agreement. And if any action is considered towards going into an agreement, a proper process should be followed, and the rights of rural people should be prioritized. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora, for that third and equally concerning example. And also apologies, everyone, for wrongly calling it blue hydrogen. I guess that goes to how deliberately confusing it all is. First, you have to figure out what color of the rainbow you're talking about. Then you have to figure out which scheme you're talking about. So I guess I got played and confused. But thank you for breaking down for us what the blue carbon is that we're hearing about here, what its implications are for real lives and real people, and also to kind of bring us back to the scene setting when we started, what the link is between, the very real link between the robbing of people of their sovereignty, and the specific examples you gave of no access to income, the taking away of their autonomy, and any say or consultation in what happens in their own home and in their own communities. And then the role that plays in perpetuating this system that continues to fuel extraction, capitalism, racism, colonialism, and displacing not only the rights and the ability of peoples to do, be, breathe, and think for themselves and act for themselves, but also to continue to condemn an entire planet of peoples to the continuing perpetuating climate crisis. Okay. That was heavy, but necessary. And it's worth taking a peek over your shoulder here at what Cesar is doing to very clearly capture everything that we've just heard. 3 very powerful examples from Brazil, Liberia, and Sri Lanka about the very real impacts of this dangerous net that's being cast to advance dangerous distractions and false solutions that equal status quo, business more than usual, more pollution, more emitting, more extraction, more colonialism. So head over here and take a peek if you'd like. While we do that, we're going to transition a little bit, hopefully now to something a little bit more on the hopeful and actionable side, we've heard a lot, 3 very clear examples of the impacts of this net zero agenda on lives, on people on the planet, on entire ecosystems, and of course for the climate action and climate justice agenda more broadly. But now, Suparna, I'm going to ask you to kick us off, because the question I think we all get when we are sitting here or talking to the press or others condemning these false solutions and dangerous distractions is, well then, what's the alternative? I have 2 problems with that question. I don't know if you share them or anyone else here. The first is the word alternative, as if like, well, we could continue with this path here that is being illustrated for us, which we clearly know doesn't work and clearly know we can't sustain, or we can take the alternative path, which is really the real path, the only path, the necessary path, especially with the clock completely running out on the time for urgent and equitable action. And then the second thing that always surprises me about this question is the lack of understanding of the abundance of readily available real solutions that actually exist, that actually work, that are cost effective, proven to reduce emissions, and in the process allow people to reclaim their sovereignty and allow us to break down this oppressive system that's perpetuating all of these injustices around the world, as well as perpetuating the climate crisis. So I'm hoping you can help lift our spirits by beginning to illustrate for us what some of these real solutions are, what they look like, how they relate to meaningful outcome here at COP, what a meaningful outcome here at COP would be, and anything else you want to share with us, Suparna.
Thanks, Rachel. Yes, it's true that, what has been going on for centuries, we hear now that they are looking for alternatives. When those practices and those solutions have always existed, are suddenly rendered, like, oh, we are looking for alternatives, and those could be real alternatives. So I think there is a binary. I agree that when we talk of false solutions and then real solutions, but it's also there is a dichotomy between false solutions and real solutions. Because what we are really seeing today, that why we are looking for alternatives, because the false solutions are creating barriers to achieving or even looking at the real solutions that we have, because we are flooded. We are flooded with the solutions related to monoculture plantations, tree planting, which are not forests. We are flooded with things like carbon offsets to reduce emissions, which of course it doesn't happen. We are today talking of bioenergy, BECCS, being used as renewable energy. Fantastic. If you burn biomass, how does it become renewable energy? One doesn't know. And then you have now coming up with geoengineering, which is, we don't even know what that animal is actually. So when you have all those in the market, the real solutions are really pushed back. And that is where you create a barrier to real solutions. And today, if you, most of us were in the people's plenary, amazing, powerful. And there were 2 quotes that I could hear from there. One was, we are solutions, number 1, and we are roots. Amazing 2 things. And that's bring me to, when an indigenous woman says that we are solutions, indigenous communities, local communities, women are solutions. And then the other one says we are roots. Now, the problem is that this precise linkage between the existence of the indigenous communities as solutions and the roots is where you find the de-linkage today. And that is where what Rachel was talking of is that the colonization or colonialism did break that linkage. if you can rip off the roots or you break the, dealing the roots, then as a solution you don't exist. Very precisely. And so this is what has actually happened, that the colonial powers appropriated the land and territories of the communities, and while appropriating the land and territories of the communities, thereby took away their rights, their access to their forest, land, and resource. Their traditional governance system was destroyed. And with that, they perhaps were dealing what they are calling weaker solutions, or their roots were completely weakened in that sense. So if we are thinking of real solutions which really existed and still exist, and I can say that we have seen like how women-led forest communities, forest tree committees in Nepal have actually restored huge area of degraded, deforested land. We have women, again, leading the conservation process in India, fighting the illegal deforestation, bringing back the traditional agricultural practices, developing the seed banks. In Chile, the Shemrelfu community is actually using the collective conservation of biodiversity and protecting their ancestral culture as a resistance towards industrial forestry and the corporates there. We have from DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Bambute community, and these are basically what we call commonly known as pygmy communities. And they are ravaged by rampant mining. And so everything that they had have been actually destroyed. Their practices, their tradition, their culture, their spirituality with the forest and land. And so what they're trying to do is, for the future generation and with the youth, is not only demanding restoration of their rights and traditional governance, but they are establishing schools and education curriculum for their youth, for intergenerational transfer of traditional knowledge and wisdom, actually, And lastly, if you see the Masai Mara community in Kenya, the women again, they as pastoralists from pastoralist communities, and their whole activity towards conservation and protection of forests, how it is being met by absence of legal protection on their own land, So that acts as a barrier to real solutions. So basically, what colonialism did, and if we can use a term kind of decolonization, and what that will mean that you have to restore the rights of the indigenous communities, women on their own territory, women's access to land, and the traditional governance system that they have. And that will be the first real solution that we should go for if we really have to address climate resilience and climate solution, real solution on the ground. That's the real solution that we should aim for, and then it will facilitate the communities on the ground driving the movement, the campaign for real solutions, because they know what it is. You have to only facilitate their restoration of rights, governance, access to land. And you see in every indigenous communities, forest communities, natural resources communities, women lead that. They not only lead the resistance, They read the fight back, and they read the process of that restoration.
Thank you, Suparna. I appreciate you reorienting us to the way forward. But also, what really stood out to me as you were speaking is that the way forward is also a return. It's not a new invention of a new way of being or a new set of solutions or a new set of people to do a new set of things. It's actually as simple as returning to the way things used to be.
Yeah, just a second.
Yeah.
And so when this is to link, if I have to link to the COP process or the climate process, so the false solutions, what Rachel was referring to, we don't even understand 6.2 and 6.4 of the Article 6 market-based mechanism. But what we have not been told, or because it's been ignored, that there is an Article 6.8 in the same Article 6, which talks of a non-market approach, which talks of real solutions, and this is being completely overshadowed by this overhyping of 6.2 and 6.4, which are false solutions. And here again is a dichotomy. Is a false solution create barrier for real solutions? And perhaps pushing 6.8, that is what many of us are trying to do, will lead you to as an alternative pathway to climate justice against 6.2 and 6.4.
Yeah, exactly. And also the utter irony, I guess, of this process, isn't it? That number one, as you said, most people don't even know that 6.8 exists on non-market approaches, which really, on paper anyway, provides one of the greatest pieces of potential in the Paris Agreement, because if you look at its literal interpretation, it would be about advancing non-market approaches or real solutions through global collaboration to respond to climate change. So first, there's this complete sort of political obliteration of it so that people aren't even aware of its existence. But then, and I've witnessed that this, as you and others have worked really hard to realize potential in 6.8, there's the irony that the more successful you get at advancing a real solutions pathway, the greater the resistance comes to shut it down. And so now I think you shared at COP28, we're seeing the risk of the co-optation of 6.8, where suddenly something that held promise that was ignored, that's now being given due attention to be realized, risks becoming co-opted as just the next version of carbon markets. And so we're kind of stuck in this continual cycle where we have all the solutions we need, we know what we need to do, and we need to be able to reset the system to remove the barriers to be able to access and implement those real solutions. We're going to hear more from our speakers, but also want to provide an opportunity to engage and discuss with all of you. So now I think with that scene setting from Suparna and drawing on the do's and don'ts, I guess, of the examples we heard from our other speakers, want to open it up to all of you to share, well, general thoughts, but if helpful also specifically your thoughts and views about what would it look like if communities were given back their sovereignty, were able to reclaim their sovereignty. What would it look like if we were able to implement these real solutions that are really the only way forward to real zero, the only way to free ourselves from this net? And any thoughts you have on what some of those real solutions would be. So don't be shy, we're among friends, and we'd love to hear your thoughts while Cesar helps us capture it as well. Yes, over here. Please feel free to introduce yourself too before you speak. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Leila. I work with Tatiana at UNESCO in Brazil. And I would like to share not what I would think would be like to be, but what is already happening in Brazil. There's a solution right now. I don't know if you all know this initiative that it's called Indigenous Life Plans in Brazil. That is a tool created by indigenous people that organize all their demands and dreams for their territories. And it's built collectively, and, well, it has a long history. But what we do not find is climate finance to really put this in action. And the thing is, we have like these beautiful plans. UNESCO did a study about this, and we have these plans in an area that it's like twice the size of France. So if we had the money to put it in action, we are going to preserve this kind of area in Brazil. And in a way that is respecting indigenous life and indigenous plans and all their visions about their way of existing, and also connected with a public policy that was also built by indigenous people in Brazil. So we have like all-scale solution, you know, underground, building, maintaining and preserving indigenous life that is responsible for maintenance, thank you, of our forest, but also connected with a public policy that has the power to amplify its powers in Brazil. So I think it's important for us to bring the solutions here, to think together how to connect them, and this is a way that we can also, you know, put the barriers at the false solutions and refusing all this new colonialism, because we have solutions that are already there, that had shown all these results to here. And, well, what we do need is climate fairness to this, and not to enter in market mechanism like you all said here in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and also reminding us, rightly so, that the solutions are already there. It's the barriers to their implementation and their full realization and potential that we need to be removing. Is there anyone else who'd like to share thoughts on any of these prompts or anything about the world as we would like to see it and how we get there? Yeah, thank you. Thank you for not making me sing. Or rather, everyone else should thank you for not making me sing.
Hi, can you hear me? Is it working?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Sylvester. I'm a filmmaker, documentary filmmaker with Simba Creative in Canada. I wasn't here for the whole event, and I came towards the end, and I'm very fascinated by the stories you're sharing about the fake solutions. You mentioned about Liberia, you know, with the forest going on there. I met some people here who are also, they're not from Africa, they're from, you know, the global north, and they're involved in like this business of like, you know, selling carbon credits. So they go to places like, you know, Zambia, Congo, or Rwanda, and then they do some project and then sell that credit to, you know, Western organizations to pretty much get the license to continue what they're doing. So I'm just wondering, what is your thought on that? Like, is it something that we need to be talking about more, like the real solutions, like, you know, maybe looking at it from sustainability? Like in Canada, there is indigenous culture there. They believe in 7 generations. Like everything that we do needs to be for the next 7 generations, which I think, if my math is not wrong, is probably about 235 years. So they know how to take care of the land, the water, and everything around us. So I'm just wondering to hear from any of you, like, should we be talking more about this, like the real solutions, and not the maybe trying to find a way to keep business going as usual?
Thank you, Sylvester, for that question. Do any of our speakers want to speak or share thoughts on that? Yeah, Suparna.
Yeah. This is why we are more now talking of real solutions. Of course, we will resist and we should reject. But I think we should go beyond in the ways that we should talk more of real solutions. The picture has to come out. And then that's the greatest thing that we can do to fight also the false solutions. And to add to it also, I think the real solutions do exist. But as I was saying, in many areas, the problem is that the realization or actualization of real solutions has a lot of barriers in terms of land, rights, governance, and how the false solutions also create those kind of barriers. Like Liberia, if you see, Liberia has a legislation to protect the indigenous territories. Now, if the same territory is handed over to a company in exchange of carbon credits, what will the communities do? Even if they could do what they could do with the land and their rights, is completely being taken away, violated. So it really acts as a barrier. But also I would say that adding to that, she was talking of finance, climate finance, and that is one area where it's getting a bit, I would say again, going backwards in the sense that in processes like COP, there are, because legitimately in terms of historical responsibility, CBDR, reparations, we hear more from the developing countries in the global south that we need climate finance, and that obligation or commitment is yet to be met. But the need for that kind of climate finance is increasing day by day. But at the same time, we should also see that the finance that is promoting and supporting these false solutions should stop. So there has to be a parallel campaign demanding divestment of public finance from false solutions, and all those has to be redirected towards real solutions. These two pictures and these two stories and narrative have to go side by side.
Thank you,
Can I
Suparna.
just
Yeah,
add?
sorry, Tatiana, go ahead.
No, just to add something to what Suparna just said, I like to think that there is this blackmail and this kind of spell of capitalism that blinds us to actually see the real solutions themselves in the territories. Because real solutions in the territories, they are customary. And if we think of the concentration of income that we have in the world right now, and that concentration of income equals to concentration of power, we can also start to think that the powerful are not many, but we are many people like really working to preserve nature and with a co-production relationship with nature. So this is something that we need to break so we can see that we are the majority of people producing solutions every day to preserve nature and not the powerful ones who are making business with nature.
Thank you, Tatiana. Nora, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think we need to get more involved on the ground. So putting local communities to claim ownership, not just in policy, but in practice. In Liberia instance, we've seen how community, they understand they have rights to the land, but there are questions that community put forward to us working at the national level. I have my land. I know, yes, this land is valuable, but it's here and it's being wasted. What can I do with it? So this gave the companies advantage to be able to come in and propose and work and take land from community for little of nothing. So to what extent are we investing in these communities to scale up the real solutions to really maximize the value of the land, to see that the land is valuable beyond what companies provide for them? So I think scaling up the real solution and investing back into the communities to scale up will be very important way to deal with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Hamanta?
No.
Okay, it's been added, it's been said. Yeah, Sarah, are you raising your hand? All right.
Then
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sarah from Friends of the Earth International, and I think when I was thinking about real solutions and sort of conditions for real solutions, it was a different kind of example that came to mind because it was about renewables, but it was an example from our member group, Friends of the Earth Palestine, Pengon, who are obviously suffering a huge amount at the moment. But they do really incredible work and have been doing really incredible work under such difficult circumstances for so long. And they have some really, really beautiful solar work that they do, particularly in the West Bank. And it has been really transformative because it really strikes me as a kind of, a real part of system change and challenging and changing systems, because it is very much about getting energy to people, but it's also about defying the kind of conditions that they're being forced to live under in terms of being reliant on energy systems from their occupier. So it's been really incredible, really transformative, really beautiful to see that. And I don't know what's happening with that work now, and I think that's what's really heartbreaking, is what are the costs and the consequences of that. But it's incredibly beautiful and transformative work. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sarah.
just a sec to add to that, Sarah, this is very important because in India, following the Narmada Valley movement against that big dam, the whole transformation in terms of how you see resistance movement came in because the slogan became, we resist, we build. We resist, we build. And that's what it does. It's actually a fantastic thing. And that story also corroborates that they're building through their own resistance,
Thank you, Suparna. Do we have a hand over here? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Babawali Obayanju. I work with Environmental Rights Action, Friends of the Earth Nigeria. Just to add to what has been said, I think we need to now deliberately, intentionally, in the next few months that would precede the COP29, as civil society, we need to work with communities to highlight these strengths that they have. So that when we come to COP next year, if we decide to come, that the actions we are going to be having would not be actions to say no, but will be actions to say, this is the solution that we have.
Yes.
See them.
Yes.
Graphically, we have an artist here. We have a filmmaker there. I'm a photographer. We have storytellers, writers. How can we intentionally visit these communities in the grassroots, highlight their stories, and bring them back to our governments before they come to the COP, before they go to CBD, to whatever conference they want to go to? How do we deliberately and intentionally highlight this plus, this strength, this resilience in the communities and showcase it to the world? That these are real solutions that they need to see. And like Tatiana said, the governments, they know, but they decide that they want to be blinded to it. And it's the obvious truth. But we need to force them to see that these solutions are real. And the other thing is we have to start thinking about how do we collaborate with other sectors beyond our environment space. Indigenous people know how to build homes, for example. I like to use that architectural design as an example because every clime has buildings that fits their weather. But what we are seeing around the world in the quest to be developed, in quotes, people around are either copying architecture from America, from Europe, from somewhere else, to bring back home that doesn't match their weather, that will require them to have more need for electricity, whereas there are communities who don't even have this electricity, but you can be in that house for 3 weeks and not need a fan or an air conditioning. You might be in that space and not even need a refrigerator because you have cool water and clean water to drink. So we need to start partnering with other people in other spaces, architecture, civil engineering, carpentry, so they too can begin to join this fight, because it's seeming like it's our fight and not their fight. So we need to find new ways to intentionally also collaborate with them, so every one of us are saying the same thing at the same time from our different silos or holes, and portray the message that we have. I think that's something that we need to do.
Thank you for that beautiful intervention and reminder. And hopefully that today's conversation can just be the next step in a journey of working more closely together across silos, geographies, topics, expertises, not just to COP next year, because we tend to think in COP to COP cycles when we're here. But of course, it's a live conversation that happens day in and day out, that has the opportunity to affect change day in, day out, not just at or in between COPs. Yes, would you like to share?
It was working. Suddenly it gives up.
Maybe tell us a joke to test it out?
This one's also not working.
A rap. Yeah, have at it. People power.
Yes.
So, hi, I'm Soman. I'm a chorus campaigner from South Korea. And I was just thinking about, incrementalism, right? COP has been very much characterized by incrementalism. And I think while, net zero is not great, real zero is much more preferable, this is the sort of thing that you cannot suddenly, blast that. We can't even agree on phase down, right? Right now, realistically, right? So saying like real zero is going to scare people. So I think, while we are, these things it takes a while to mainstream and socialize this real zero concept. I was wondering if sometimes you can use false solutions to benefit indigenous communities. So this carbon credit concept is obviously ridiculous, right? So you're paying to sin, right? But at the same time, what's happening right now with the UAE buying carbon credits in Liberia and Tanzania, Zimbabwe, in order to preserve forests, could be a positive development if it helps protect forests and if that money trickles down to local communities in an equitable manner. So I think, there are some times, where you can, to be contrarian, I guess, use false solutions in order to achieve, greater goals like preventing deforestation and actually getting money to Africa. Yeah, because I think while it is very just to say cancel debt, right? Cancel Africa's debt. That may not happen, but it's, another way of achieving the same goal, right? Yeah.
Thank you for being contrarian, which is allowed, and an important part of the conversation in challenging and pushing each other to think our very purest and greatest and surest. I'm wondering, Hamantha, do you want to come in on that and just share some thoughts?
Thank you. I want to take the floor from Wali. In the Sri Lankan context, I've been thinking about what our real solutions are actually. And so we are normally, we are stuck in one development model. I think that's the problem we all are suffering. That's the reason. So we have this whole climate crisis. But when it comes to the solutions, the four solutions are very handful of solutions that these people are proposing. And also, finally, it has come down to the nature-based solution. So they want to make nature-based solution as, So, but in our communities, as Suparna and many others mentioned, there are millions of different solutions we have. So if we just say, okay, if you just want to name few of them, so we'll be again going in the wrong pathway. But definitely we can understand what are the features of these solutions? Now, the people-based solutions and the women, children, so they all should benefit. These kind of solutions and the very much close to what is nature. So I think when they hijacked the nature-based solutions, we were a bit stuck because we said don't make nature as a market mechanism. Nature as a solution. So, but when I look at some of the projects which big funders have supported in my country, cutting culverts to stop soil erosion, planting vetiveria to stop soil erosion. I mean, this has been doing by our local farmers for years and years, generations they have done. Now, the issue is because it's a market system, nature become a market system, now somebody is going to pay you for that one. So I think that's what is wrong with this system. So I think to change all this, as Sarah mentioned, that we need to have the system change, and that system change, we are trying to understand what system we want to bring. I think that's quite very, very important. And also, maybe there are certain solutions we can suggest for, okay, these are the ones for the agrarian communities, the fishermen, etc., etc. But there's also, we need to understand, is a society is very diverse. There are rural, the urban communities, so we need to think about different set of solutions. So these solutions are not going to be a handful of, there are millions of, if not billions, And definitely the way that we consume the natural resources in this world and emit, this is not going to resolve the issue. And I think the world need to think about how they want to do the degrowth in each of their the high consuming societies. That should be part of the solution. If we think that our solutions are fitting to the rural communities, the forest communities, indigenous communities, that we still have a big block that we need to find the solution. So that's where the renewables and reduction of consumption and many different approaches should come. So I think basically what my suggestion is also that if we can come up with, of course we have tried coming with what are the pathways for system change. The Friends of the Earth has produced a publication on pathways for system change. So we need to think about how we want to bring what principles there should be in the real solutions. Perhaps, so we need to do more work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Tatiana, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, sure. This is an interesting intervention, and I will allow myself to disagree just on the benefits of conversation. I think that what we have been talking here is about a very worrying process of nature, of making nature, transforming nature in a financial asset. So what we have talked here on the side of all solutions is about ecocide, land rights being violated, intellectual property rights being violated, consultation rights, communities' autonomy as self-government being violated. So I question the real benefit for solutions if on the one side you have money circulating and on the other side you have all those rights violations on the ground affecting communities. I will just give you an example. In Brazil, communities engaging in carbon market projects, they are slowly stopping to farm their own food because, as you know, carbon markets immobilize land. So this is something very serious because then communities do not have money to buy food, or then they have health issues because they are changing their food and nutrition culture. This is really serious. So other questions for other issues. For example, communities are not actually participating in structuring national laws or international discussions as we see here. Governments are not guaranteeing accountability. Accountability depends on availability of information. And here we have a problem, a democratic problem, because availability of information in this kind of business is practically non-existent, since we are transferring land management to private institutions. If we are transferring land management to private institutions, then you do not have the situation for transparency and accountability that would be needed so that communities can actively claim for their rights once they are violated. So for all this tragic scenario, I don't think that simply making money circulate means that communities are actually being benefited by this kind of project. We also have alternatives or real solutions on the side of government. We are in a context when we are discussing a renewal of international financial institutions. We are in a context where we are discussing changes in financial institutions on the national level as well, with some very interesting solutions to allow governments to spend more and to finance via public finance rights. But again, those are being obliterated by the mainstream narrative on markets and capitalism and strengthening the financial systems. So this is just food for thought.
Thank you, Tatiana. Yes, Lise, did you want to share something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that, I guess, that it's also that quite often we're seeing an increasing number of investigations that are showing that those promises are actually never delivered. So whether it's promises of resources and money to local communities, investigations are uncovering that money is going directly into the pockets of the project owners and developers. Whether it's about whether an ecosystem is being protected, there's increasing investigations that those ecosystems are actually being sometimes even more destroyed by the projects, or that it's the ecosystem next door that's going to be more heavily impacted by the protection of one. So it's not just that it's not the right solutions, it's also that the promises are just not delivered, and that we're seeing an increasing number of evidence that those things are just lies by the industry.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for posing the question, because these questions need to be posed, and the reality, the lived experience, the evidence needs to be considered in order to know for certain that the way forward is the right one. Yes?
Can I three quick points?
Of course.
I think we should keep in mind who conserves, who protects, and who restores. State does not. A forester does not. A company does not. So I think that the first thing in terms of when you support even a small-scale carbon offset project should be remembered. And that same communities, if they do not have access to the land, if their rights over the land goes, then what happens? Second is, are you shifting the burden of addressing climate change to the communities who are not, who cannot be blamed for this crisis? Fourth is, if they need money, so that public finance has to come from the state. If the communities really need money, that public finance should be there. So I think on these three issues, we should rethink if we have some kind of a psychological support for such kind of a project.
Thank you, Suparna. And thank you, everyone, for also sharing your experiences, ideas, your questions. This has been a really great start to a conversation that I hope we can continue in many ways outside of these halls. We're coming down to our final couple of minutes. So before we close, I just want to hand over to each of our speakers to see if maybe you can tell us what the most important thing is that you want all of us here today to take away from the last hour and 15 minutes together. So Tatiana, I'll start with you. Oh, nope.
Let me think.
Who wants to go first?
No, I think many of these false solutions we're still learning, and they're coming big. I think sharing this information is very, very important, because I'm also looking for similar concepts coming in other parts of the world, and then sharing this information would be really helpful. So without that experience, it will be very hard for us to fight against our governments and those, especially when it comes from some big environmental NGOs from the world, and people think, oh, it's the civil society coming, but civil society coming, and there's somebody's money pot is in the back. So that's really hard, and they can easily take some of the smaller organizations on board. So that's where we have to be very careful. So I think sharing information, bad stories, and maybe if you have good ones, so I think that all will be helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amantha. Tatiana, are you ready?
Yeah, just very quickly, I think that what is important about what we have talked here is that we need to channel climate finance to the real solutions on the territory. This is, and that we have to make public finance pay as well, not the market.
Thank you. Nora, any final remarks or thoughts?
Yeah, I think we need to prioritize rights in all of this matter. We have to ensure that people's rights are protected in these discussions. People's rights are protected on the ground. We need to bring community voices to the table, community to participate in these processes and understand as much as we do, are trying to make ourselves understand. And yeah, do more underground related work. I think what Wale said, we really need to follow that. As we move from here, let's go back into our communities and raise awareness and educate people and help them protect their territories.
Thank you, Nora. Suparna, any final words?
As we say, a single line, gender just, rights-based approach to real solutions, real zero. Finished.
Ooh, there you have it. All right, thank you so much to everyone for taking the time to be here, especially as the clock winds down on COP28. We appreciate you giving of your time, your energy, and also sharing with us. Huge thank you to Caesar for doing a brilliant job of capturing everything we spoke about today. Please do take a look. It's beautifully articulated. Feel free to take a picture. If and as you use it, please do credit Caesar and the Artivists Network. Thank you to Tatiana, Hemantha, Suparna, and Nora for being here today, and hope we can continue the conversation. Take